Hey everyone, welcome back to Integrative Psychonautics. Hope you've been doing well out there. In today's video, we're going to be talking about one of the central, most important parts of the psychedelic experience, and that is touching an experience of deep wholeness within ourselves, in particular through non-dual states, mystical experience, ego dissolution, whatever you want to call it. That's what we're talking about today. So if that interests you, please watch on. Okay, so before we go ahead and start to talk about all the different facets and aspects of this particular topic that I'd really like to share with you today, I thought it would just be kind of fair and humanizing of me to share a little bit of my own personal experience and relationship with this type of experience, as well as some of my thoughts and observations that I'm seeing about this topic and how it's being discussed online. So perhaps we'll start there with just kind of what I see in the landscape around this discussion. Now, like most things online, of course, ego death, ego dissolution, non-dual experiences, mystical experiences, however you want to frame this, of course, they too becomes, a subject to argue about online, like everything else, right? So if you get into Reddit or any of these other places where people come together to talk about topics online, invariably and inevitably, people have strongly polarized, very different takes and perspectives and opinions on these topics, and end up getting aggressive about that and kind of getting extreme about that. I do think that this idea of ego death, which is one way of describing this, has become a bit memeified. And I am a bit concerned, if I'm going to be honest, about some of the kind of unhealthy way that I see people pursuing ego death in the psychedelic space, especially amongst younger people, especially amongst people who are perhaps underprepared, who are very new to psychedelics. By very new, I mean maybe 2 years in or less. People who don't have strong frameworks of spiritual understanding, epistemological understanding, philosophical understanding to perhaps support this kind of experience. People who are, quite frankly, overdosing and kind of maxing out their brain, like really pushing it into the red in order to have this kind of experience and pursuing something that I think is slightly different from ego death, but is being conflated with ego death, which is this kind of blank, no thinking, like no awareness kind of moment or space that can happen when you get really, really high on a psychedelic or on a lot of different substances or experiences. So people are kind of trying to push their brain towards this kind of breaking point where they kind of blank out and they lose track of themselves, they lose track of time, they lose track of everything, and calling that an ego death. And based on everything else I'm about to share with you and my own understanding, and again, this is the kind of topic we could stretch out it could probably be a whole channel and an ongoing discussion. Certainly could be a series of videos, no problem. I don't think that that's ego death. I think that that's something else. And I think that what we know of it classically as ego death is a slightly different experience. So I do want to make that nuance here and kind of speak to that. I don't know if this kind of like blanking out your brain thing is necessarily constructive, like useful, or healthy, quite honestly. And so I do have concern about that. I do have concern about a lot of the kind of ways that people relate to ego death. But if there's anything I've learned about psychedelics and really about psychology in general and people's way that we map experiences and words and meanings together, one thing is for certain, and especially this is true in the psychedelic space, is that people will tend to project their own sets of interpretations and meanings onto an experience rather than just experiencing it directly and holding it in a very open-ended kind of understanding. So you see this a lot in the ego death space online, where people generally are bickering, they're arguing, there's a lot of semantics, there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of, trying to separate it from the spiritual experience, even though by all accounts, this is perhaps the core of what a spiritual experience is. There's a lot of, others insisting that this is spiritual or insisting that it means certain things that maybe we might be kind of abstractions or generalizations or kind of, again, also another type of projection on the experience. And so what we have here at the core is this deeply mysterious, deeply profound experience that's possible for human beings to have that transcends knowing in some sort of cognitive, rational, intellectual way. It really transcends language, it transcends words, it transcends concepts. And so when we are trying to ascribe concepts and words and maps of understanding to it, we are by definition projecting onto this experience. So I just want to kind of name that at the front of the video here, that while I'm going to be describing different angles on this experience and there will be interpretation involved in that, that to some degree, when we're talking about this experience, this is an experience that exists outside of thought and speech and language. So therefore, using language and thought and speech to talk about it is in some way a projection on it. I'm going to try to, at least if I'm going to project on it, use the most transparent projections possible, the most loosely held, open-ended, non-conclusion-based projections. But I just want to kind of name that. Okay, so let me share a little bit about my own personal experience with these types of experiences, my own history with it, so that you have a sense of where I'm coming from with this. So I had my first ego death, ego dissolution experience when I was 17 years old. I was probably, I'm guessing a year, maybe slightly over a year into my relationship with psychedelics. Have been doing them a lot and enjoying them, but not really having these intensely deep, profound experiences. They were much more kind of silly, playful, maybe a little cognitive, kind of more like your cliche kind of teenager use of psychedelics. Then lo and behold, long story short, a friend of mine found a book with kind of a map of how to have an ego death experience. He got us together. He read it to us, under a solid dose of LSD. And I proceeded to have an out-of-body experience and a full non-dual mystical experience for probably the better part of an hour, returned to my body, and my life was transformed. My life has never been the same since. It was one of the most profound, important, beautiful, magical, revelatory moments of my life. And that really set the template of my North Star in terms of what I knew was now possible inside myself, how to feel, what kind of level experience, how to navigate getting to that experience and back into my ego, back into default modes of consciousness. I learned a lot about what it is I'm working towards in meditation, what it is I'm working towards in spiritual practice, or at least in part, what it's like to have a profoundly spiritual experience that goes kind of beyond your normal state of consciousness. And that was the first of what became many, many, many mystical experiences in my life that I've had since. I don't even know if I could count them all. And a lot of these have come from psychedelics. They've come from all kinds of different psychedelic experiences. I've even had them on what are considered non-ego dissolving psychedelics like MDMA. In other words, as you kind of learn how to get into this state, there's a skill there. There's an understanding of how to open up, how to melt, how to dissolve, how to let go into this kind of state. And when you know what the state is, you can find your way back there. I've had this experience from meditation practices, from spiritual practices. I've had it in dreams, in lucid dream moments, where all of a sudden my dream becomes kind of more directed and aware and then turns into this kind of non-dual mystical experience, etc., etc., etc. So this is something that's been a huge part of my life. And it really is at the core of my own spiritual life, my own spiritual practice, my own sense of spirituality. And I think for anyone who is like an avid mystic, practitioner or pursuer of the mystical, whether that's through Eastern spirituality or shamanism or their own practices, generally this is kind of the territory that we're aiming for with these kinds of practices. So spirituality isn't something I talk a lot about on this channel because I want to try to keep the conversation more about healing, less about my own personal interpretation and meaning sets, so that I'm not kind of, putting those on you as an audience, but rather I'm kind of just holding the space. But just know that this is a whole part of my life. This is a whole part of the territory. And I think, quite frankly, a whole part of the territory of psychedelics to be open to and honest with ourselves about and allow to happen, that is profound and beautiful and life-changing in the extreme. So I could wax poetic about this for a long time, but I'm looking down at the time here, and this segment of the video alone has been almost 10 minutes. So let me put a pin in it there. I'm happy to talk about this more if you guys are interested about it. But let's go ahead and start to unpack some of the different aspects of what this kind of wholeness experience is, so that you have a better sense of maybe what to expect, what I mean when I say this, how this applies to your own healing, how this applies to personal development, personal growth in general, etc. So let's talk about it. So it's probably useful just to take a couple minutes here and kind of define what I mean by wholeness here. Now, obviously, this experience that I'm talking about is very deep. It's a deep level experience of yourself, or of life, or of your body, or of your vantage point, your subjective experience on life. It is experiencing yourself at what I think is probably the very deepest level you could possibly experience yourself or experience life. Some synonyms, just to kind of tickle the semantic networks here and get you kind of thinking about this a little bit. When I'm talking wholeness here, I'm also talking about touching your absolute depth, getting in touch with your core essence. And I really think these are all synonyms, okay? Getting in touch with your core essence. Having a transpersonal experience. In other words, an experience of yourself that goes beyond the sense of what is personal to you, right? So some sort of unitive, there's a sense of impersonality to it, but also a profound sense of depth and coreness about it. It is an experience of being beyond your identity, being beyond your sense of me, of who I am, of what my experience is. It's touching into a part of you that is vastly deeper and vastly broader and vastly more whole than your identity. It is being beyond your narrative. I do kind of equate identity and narrative as being, let's say there's a relationship there. Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe one feeds the other. But let's say that it's also being beyond your narrative. It's touching back into your experience of life in the present moment that transcends all your memories, all your reference experiences, all the things that you normally think about as references for who your sense of self is, and into this much more deep, much more immediate sense of experience. It is also an experience, a direct experience of your own life force, would be another way to think about this, of the electricity of your own nervous system functioning, of the fundamental animating quality, let's say, that moves your body, that is, what you have to draw upon to, operate your body and your muscles and your mind and your movement and all the things that you do and think and say. What is that life force at the root of your being? Getting in touch with that. Another way of thinking about it would be being connected to the wholeness of life. So as we go deeper within ourselves and more in touch with our essential nature, what we also what we also find concurrently is, how do I put this? A part of you that is life, that is connected to all of life, that is a part of life, that is a part of life in the same way that the wind currents and the ocean and the flowers and the trees are a part of this life force, right? This movement, this kind of cohesion of life expression, right? And we get in touch with that when we're in a mystical experience. Other words, that I would use, obviously, mystical experience, non-dual experience. Some people would call this an enlightenment experience. I think all of that's a valid way of describing this territory. Like I said, these are all synonyms in my book. So I hope that starts to give you a sense of what we're talking about here. When I say wholeness, I mean getting in touch with yourself, not as in, the early you, the unbroken you, but everything you've ever been. everything you ever could be, all your potential that's untapped into, all the aspects of you you're totally unaware of. And again, that root core kind of fabric of your being, that core essential nature from which you construct yourself, from which you draw upon or call upon in order to be an expression, right? So I know that I'm kind of using abstract language here. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to kind of wrap this. Let's talk a little bit about why this is useful. How is touching our wholeness at this kind of level, which sounds kind of extreme, I understand. How is that useful for healing, for growth, for personal development, for leveling up your life? How is this useful practically? Let's talk about that. So I want to just kind of give you a little hypothetical situation. Sometimes when people are in a process of healing psychologically, emotionally, letting go of the past, resolving wounds, resolving issues, what we start to realize, wounds can exist at different layers of our being. And I'll probably do another video at some point about different maps of the different layers of our being. But let's just kind of take it as potentially true that there at least are different layers of our being, right? And that wounding can happen at any of these different layers or levels. So they can happen at more superficial levels, but wounds can also happen at very, very deep levels, right? And one of the deepest levels of our being, it's not the deepest, but one of the deepest, is our identity, our sense of self, our sense of me, of who I am, right? You are not your identity. You are the creator of your identity. You are the person wearing your identity. You are the intelligence that automatically arranged an identity in the first place. But for most of us, we don't know that. We don't know how to distinguish that. We feel like our sense of me, of I, and whatever our core essential nature is the exact same thing. It's one-to-one. There is no separation. There is no distinction there. When we have an experience of wholeness, we start to get a sense of how those are two different things, and how I am so much more than what my identity, may tell me that I am. And that my identity is actually a small portion or small fragment of a much larger picture of my beingness and my completeness and my wholeness. And so why is this useful? How is this useful? If you have to change your identity, what if you need to heal or transform or change your identity? What if your entire construct of your sense of self is based on wounds and flawed core beliefs that no longer serve you, that are causing you unnecessary suffering, that are causing you immense amounts of pain, that are not getting you the results you want in your life, that are, cyclical, that keep you stuck, that keep you struggling? What if all of that, is there because there's a piece of identity that is not accurate, is no longer true, it needs to be kind of transcended or let go of or put in the past? What do we do? Obviously, in order to be able to transform your identity, you have to be able to experience yourself beyond your identity. You have to know experientially, in your bones, in your body, in your muscles, I am not my identity. I am something deeper than that. I am the author of my identity. I am the creator of my identity. I am something much more profound than that I can re-author a new identity. I can reconstruct a new sense of self. There are many ways to view myself, many reference experiences to pull from to construct a sense of self. And so without this experience of touching your core essential nature, your depths, your wholeness, right? Understand your identity is not your wholeness. Your identity is a small piece, a small fragment, and often a distorted fragment of our wholeness that we use to kind of navigate this world and find our place, particularly in our family system that we grew up in, and we find a way of fitting in that helps us survive. And it all happens unconsciously, and it all happens very young, and it all happens very immediately. Some of our identity is based on feedback we get, reward systems we get. And so there's all this stuff that creates this warped vision of self, right? That is based often, not always, but often, in wounding, in pain, in disconnect, or in some sort of kind of developmental wobble, shall we say. And so in order to be able to change at that level, to undo that, to heal that, to let go of those perspectives and narratives and beliefs, we have to be able to dive deeper. And so I think in the most profound sense, in the most maybe practical sense in terms of, therapeutic healing, personal growth, personal transformation, we need to have this knowledge. We need to have this direct lived experience of not being bound to our identity and not overlapping those so much that we're confused about it. We need to experience what we are beyond the identity, so that then we know for fact, with proof that I'm not my identity. Therefore, I can change my identity. I can reshape it. I can transcend it. I can integrate it. I can heal it. I can work with it, right? Because if your sense of all that you are, if your sense of wholeness is conflated with your sense of identity, then logically from that point of view, it's impossible to change. Because how can you change the all that you are? You can't, right? So it doesn't make sense. And yet we know people can have profound identity level change. We know that people can have spiritual experiences. We know that people can, experience growth and become something so much more than they were. So clearly you are not your identity. So I hope this is making sense. I know I'm being a little circular here. I'm kind of reiterating 1,000 times like I do, but I hope you get the point here that this is of profound utility, just in a psychological sense, in an emotional sense. I do think obviously there are other utilities to this in terms of sense of profound connection to life, a sense of new possibility, a sense of renewal, of kind of your sense of, wholeness, sense of connection to, all the infinite varieties of ways that you could live life. There's a lot that comes with the mystical experience that I think is deeply, profoundly useful, beautiful, practical, that kind of resets our nervous system. But at the most simple, basic level, one of the things I want to share with you was just this message of, in order to change your identity, if you need to do work at that level, you need to be able to go deeper than your identity. So this is one reason why. So let's talk a little bit about some of the qualities that we experience as we access our wholeness. I think this is really important to keep in mind because for a lot of us, this notion of ego dissolution, ego death, transcendence, non-dual experience, while sounding appealing or interesting, can also be frightening, terrifying, feel very alien, seem disturbing, even conceptually can seem a little bizarre. So I want to just give a sense of some of the qualities that we discover as kind of inherent to our fundamental fabric of being, if you will, when we get in touch with that. And these are useful also. I want you to kind of, as I rattle off this list here, I want you to think about some of the ways that these states might be useful in terms of psychological or emotional healing in your life, right? So if you are really in touch with these, right? So we've got bliss. Bliss is a core feature. It's a core state of the fabric of your being. When you're in touch with your core state, your core being, bliss will probably be found there. Joy, a profound sense of connection to yourself, to everything around you, to all of life, right? A profound sense of love and compassion for whom? For everything, for yourself, for your past, for all of life, for everyone on earth, for all, for all the other animals and all the other life forms. Having this profound sense of deep, deep, deep love and compassion, like the kind of love that, can blow your mind, can absolutely blow your mind. You even know you're capable of feeling that kind of love and that kind of compassion. That's there in your core being. A sense of profound well-being, a sense of everything is all right, everything is in the right place, everything's okay. I'm full of life force. I'm safe. I'm abundant in my own beingness. A sense of spontaneity. This is another very common one. A lot of times when we are really aligned with our core essence, our core essential nature, we speak spontaneously, we act spontaneously, We're not reactive. We're not agenda laden. We're not caught up in the future. We're not, worried about the past. We're not worried about others. We're just present. And that's another quality here, presence. And we are living in the moment, highly spontaneous. We get insight and clarity. We get understanding of all the layers of what's happening in a given moment inside ourselves and around us. And presence, like I mentioned. These are all qualities that are inherent to what seems like, I don't know how we test this. I don't know how we could verify this. These are universals when people touch this state of non-duality, of mysticism, of wholeness, of oneness, of immersion into, the cosmic soup, however you want to think of that. These are the types of states we tend to experience as tightly correlated with that. And that's been documented throughout history for thousands of years in terms of mystical experiences and religious experiences, this kind of a thing. So I think it's important for you to know that if you're going to go into an ego dissolution state, these are the kinds of states you're going to experience: intense bliss, joy, connection, compassion, well-being, spontaneity, presence, insight, clarity, maybe wonder, maybe awe is another one. Things like this. So I just want to kind of define that a bit for you, because I understand it can seem a little off-putting or a little strange or a little scary if you've never had this experience, but this is kind of what it looks like at the core of it. And just in case I wasn't clear in that last segment, what I'm saying by describing those qualities is those belong to you. Those belong to each of us at our core when we are in touch with our wholeness. Right? So this is another way of thinking about it. So when I'm doing a lot of work with people where I'm helping them to kind of repattern themselves, and we're doing hypnosis work or coaching work, one of the things I'm often doing is helping them get into a place of expansion, of kind of unplugging from the struggle of the particular drama of whatever it is that needs healing, and getting into a more expanded place where they're a little more in touch with their wholeness. And generally speaking, that empowers a person to start to process whatever needs healing in a totally different way. It all makes different sense from the vantage point of our wholeness. So these kinds of states start to arise. I start to get a person back in wholeness, and maybe they have a bit more bliss, or they have a bit more joy, or a bit more compassion, or a bit more well-being, or a bit more kind of spontaneous insight or clarity about the situation, right? So one of the healing moves in general, and this is true, outside of psychedelics, but psychedelics give you a dramatic version of this, is this move back in wholeness, which helps you have all of these resource states that are inherent to your being come online and become available to you to bring to bear on whatever the issue is that needs healing or resolving or supporting or etc. So just want to kind of make that point. So let's talk a little bit about, why you would go here. So I just want to make the point to you that this experience of wholeness, non-duality, oneness, bliss, immersion, dissolution, mystical experience, however you want to describe that. This kind of experience is one of the core features of psychedelics. And in fact, I would argue the core feature of psychedelics. I mean, if you think of it this way, the higher the dose you take of a psychedelic, the more likely you are to have this kind of experience, right? So it's not a guarantee. There are things and factors that can steer you away from this kind of experience, but all things being lined up properly, this is where people tend to end up with their psychedelic experiences. So I want you to understand that this is a huge part, this non-dual ego dissolution, wholeness, deep self, essential self experience is a major part of the why of taking psychedelics in the first place. So I hope that's clear to you. I hope you already understand that. Maybe you've already had these types of experiences, or maybe this is something you've already kind of made your peace with and you're excited about or looking towards. But if you're not, and this is something you're like, I don't know about that, understand that if you're effing around in the territory of psychedelics, this is a big part of what comes with the territory, and you're very likely to find out. And fortunately, it's generally a really blissful, beautiful, life-changing profound experience. And this is why when you see people do these kind of psilocybin studies or whatever, and they rate the experiences amongst the most valuable in their life ever, this is why. So I just want to kind of make that point here. And with these experiences, I wanted to just speak to kind of the core skill involved here. So as you are kind of going into this kind of experience and you're kind of losing track of your normal state of functioning, you're losing track of your sense of your body, you're kind of melting, it can be really alarming if you're not used to this kind of experience. There's a lot of body sensations that go with that. It can feel very intense and kind of agitating, frightening, uncomfortable. And there really is a skill involved here that I want to name and kind of just remind you of, which is this ability to surrender or to let go or to melt into it. And this is one of those things where, some people get kind of triggered around the idea or the word of surrendering. I think you can also think of it just as easily as melting into or relaxing completely into or dissolving into, allowing yourself to just totally, melt down into, this state, just totally let go in the same way that you might relax in a really good massage. If you've ever had a good massage, you really want to get into that place where your body's just rubber and limp, and the massage therapist can just like work your body without you trying to work with them or work along with them, where you allow the full weight of your arm to be picked up by them and they could just work on it, et cetera, right? So it's that level of deep relaxation and deep opening that really makes this work. If you are uncomfortable with this idea of relaxing at that level, if you're uncomfortable with this idea of melting or dissolving into, that might be something you'd want to work at or practice in different ways, perhaps out of a psychedelic experience, and find different ways to get into that deeply relaxed, deeply open, allowing, kind of flowing, passive state, because that's really where this state emerges and when it gets good. So that's our part of it, is to learn how to open up to it, to melt into it, to allow it to flow through us rather than try to lead it, manipulate it, control it, right? So that's kind of the weird Tao, the weird Zen, the weird kind of, counterintuitive thing about this experience, is that it really does take a kind of relaxation that for some people is really challenging, and there's kind of something happening through you, which you're witness to, but you're also just consenting to and allowing to happen, that isn't necessarily being led by a rational, conscious, intentional mind. So bear that in mind. It's a skill. And on that note, really quick here, the way I think of this is almost like, I like to use the metaphor of, a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. And I think this is a really apt way of understanding a really good mystical experience, psychedelic session, where when a caterpillar is going to turn to a butterfly, right, it eats a bunch of leaves, it gets all prepared, it builds a cocoon, it goes inside the cocoon. And I don't know if you know this, some of you will probably already know this, it actually melts down its entire body into like its essential nature, kind of as like just a liquid. It totally liquefies its body and melts itself down. And then from that liquid, melted body, it has a blueprint already in its genetics of, how to reconstruct itself into the butterfly it then kind of reforms into. And once it's totally completed that process, and it's ready to break out of the cocoon, then it breaks out of the cocoon and it flies off as a butterfly, right? I think it's very much the same thing here with touching this level of our being. So I do think it's deeply important to touch this level of our being. And again, the skill is this kind of melting down or letting go and letting ourselves totally just dissolve into being in touch with our core essence, if you will. And from that wide open, very kind of sensitive, like just melted down state, we will eventually kind of take a new form and reform a new identity, reform a new ego. And so there's a certain amount of trust and a certain amount of patience. And just, I think it's important to understand that really what you're doing is kind of melting yourself down to your core essential nature, having the courage to do that, having the courage to just be in that state, trust that, know that you're safe. And then, eventually you kind of inherently will come back to your body. You will inherently come back to your ego, come back to your identity, probably with a renewed sense of who you are, or a more alive, vibrant sense of who you are. So that's essentially the skill we're talking about here. And again, I think this is one of the most important things you can do in terms of just general life experiences, general well-being, general mental health. And on that note, let's talk a little bit about, why I think this is so powerful in terms of good mental health outcomes and personal growth outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're at all curious about psychedelic therapy in the psychedelic space, you've probably heard before that these mystical experience moments tend to be, again, rated among the most important experiences in a person's life. And generally speaking, if someone is, going to have a psychedelic experience to work on depression, anxiety, grief, addiction issues, these kinds of things, these big, deep, ongoing, pervasive issues in a person's life, generally speaking, what we find is that the more robust long-term outcomes, the most powerful outcomes, the rated satisfaction of a person's life afterwards strongly correlates with if they've had one of these types of experiences that I'm describing here. So why would that be? Let me give some thoughts on how this works and some ways we can use these mystical, ego death, non-dual experiences to heal, to transform, to improve our sense of well-being. So I think, I've kind of peppered it all through this video in my messaging here, but I think one of the major reasons that these are so healing is that essentially you've given yourself a way broader scope of understanding of who you are. So what, if we have a problem and we're identified with a problem in our life and we're totally wrapped up in the problem and we think about the problem all the time, and the problem is most of where our attention is throughout our day and throughout our week, and we're really deeply kind of struggling with a problem, it's very easy to start to confuse that problem with the wholeness of who we are, the wholeness of our experience. We can kind of make the problem too big in our field of vision and lose kind of the larger scope of our life, if you will. And so I think one of the major things that happens is when we have a non-dual experience or a mystical experience, it's like we regain that scope and the problem now seems much smaller in comparison. So it's kind of an experiential level reframe of our understanding of ourselves, of our understanding of life, of our understanding of reality, of our understanding of our problem, of our understanding of our relationships and, the contents of our life and our personal history. It reframes all of that in a new light through raw experience that gives you this sense of, oh, okay, right. I was really hung up on this little corner of my being where I've been in pain or suffering or struggling, but I'm so much more than that. Or there's so much more possible for me, or life is so much bigger than me and my pain and my struggle, et cetera, right? And so I think this reframe of perspective at a deep experiential level gives a lot of people, it's like you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know how stuck you are in your own little small, narrow perspective on life. And you don't know that you're so much more than you realize that you are until you have an experience of that. It's just outside of your awareness completely. And so I think what happens for a lot of people here is that we're so caught up in our usual grind of thought loops and emotion loops and perceptions and ways of being that we just really have no idea. And just have an experience of stepping outside the box of our identity and our habits and our patterns and our narratives and all of that, and feeling life fresh in our being, in our body, that's deeper, that's broader, that's more vivid, that's more ancient, that's more profound, that is the kind of, again, the substrate, the core fabric, the foundational material from which we've constructed, our life and our experience, including our suffering. When we get a sense of that difference, it changes everything. I think for a lot of us, all we need is a glimpse or a taste, and that can be enough to kind of break the old narrative. That can be enough to kind of break the loop, break the trance of our depression or our, hopelessness, or our sense of feeling lost, or our sense of anxiety, or whatever. It can just be enough of a pattern interrupt, enough of a total, mismatch to, how we thought it was, that it can really just kind of dissolve a lot of that for a lot of people. So I think that that's often why these experiences are so healing and so transformative. I think for a lot of us also, if I'm going to be honest here, again, I don't like to broadcast my own angles on spirituality, because I kind of think it's in poor taste when people do that. And I want to be clean about not projecting my maps onto you as an audience, my view, my perspective, all that. But I do think in general, our culture is massively disconnected on all levels: cognitively, conceptually, physically, emotionally, and perhaps most of all, spiritually. And I think that another reason that these experiences heal in the way that they do is that they provide a sense of spiritual connection, a sense of spiritual understanding, a sense of spiritual clarity that is visceral and is felt and is a direct connection to whatever that spiritual realm, spiritual reality, spiritual truth is. And I think that for a lot of people, that's a missing piece that a lot of times we don't even know we're missing. We don't realize that we have a longing for this profound sense of connection or oneness or safety or love or bliss. And then when we experience it, it's like, oh, wow, holy moly. I had no idea that's what I needed, but that's what I needed. And so I think that's often also why these things heal. And there's another way I want to kind of share or think about this, another angle I want to put this in, which I don't know of anyone else talking about it this way, but to me it's pretty obvious, which is that an experience like this is the ultimate form of resource state, right? So if we're talking about states of experience that we can pull upon that give us strength or give us, a sense of well-being or a sense of clarity or a sense of alignment or a sense of functioning in a certain way, that we could call resource states, right? These are ways of being that we feel that we can use to, address issues in our life, right? So generally speaking, one of the ways of understanding healing is we're connecting resource states that we've experienced to problem areas in our life. And when we connect the resource to the problem, it starts to unwire the problem, right? So a non-dual experience, a mystical experience done properly, gone right, is such a deep and profoundly beautiful experience that it is debatably the ultimate resource state. Like if we want to use a spiritual languaging here and you want to call that an experience of the divine, what could be more of a resource than the divine? Nothing. If that's your map and your model of understanding life, and you believe in a divinity, which I do, then what could, there's nothing that could resource you more than that, right? And so this is another way of thinking about it, is that even if in that moment, that experience is just what it is, and it's not necessarily particularly healing, this is something that now you have this profoundly powerful experience of bliss, of connection, of well-being, of clarity, of, alignment, of, et cetera, right? And then in work afterwards, that can all be used to connect the dots back to whatever the issue is and start to transform the issue, because now you have this robust, powerful resource state to draw upon. So that's my thoughts on how this can be used to heal and kind of why these experiences are healing. So let's just summarize. We'll call it a video. Hope you've been enjoying this. Okay, so in summary, really quick, one of the most important things, and I would argue one of the most psychedelic things you can do with psychedelics, is pursue or have some sort of a mystical, non-dual experience, or what you might also want to think of as touching that place of wholeness within yourself, knowing that intimately in a firsthand experience. Generally, that's going to look like, ego death, dissolution, melting into the oneness, melting down into just the raw essential life force, experiencing total bliss, total peace, total joy, total connection. This is going to be something, again, that transcends this sense of identity, sense of narrative, sense of self, and puts you in touch with the part of you that is a part of all of life. Generally speaking, again, this can be used as a tool for helping you understand yourself beyond your identity. So then that gives you kind of the awareness and the spaciousness in your being to transform your identity if you need to do identity work. This can also be useful as a reframe of understanding that you are so much more than just your problems that you might be kind of hung up on and fixated on. Or again, this can be used as the deepest, most robust, powerful resource state I know of, that you can then use in, work afterwards to kind of plug back into your problems and start to transform whatever, pain or issue or struggle you're having in your life. So that's kind of the summary on that. I realize this is a long video. I hope this is really useful to you. This is a topic I love to talk about, and I have plenty more to say about it, but I think for now this is good. So if you like this, do the usual: thumbs up, like, subscribe, comment, interact. I'm happy to build a conversation here with you guys. Thank you for watching. Much love to you all. I have more content on the way soon.